This is the Georgia Guidestones. A couple of people have mentioned the Georgia Guidestones during the course of the weekend. So when we talk about this agenda of population reduction, it is literally cast in tablets of stone. Now this henge appeared mysteriously in around 1982, and it's attributed to an R.C. Christian. And there's been a lot of speculation as to who R.C. Christian might be. Some people said it's a Rosicrucian, whatever. But there's no real foundation for that supposition. It has actually been linked to a guy called Laszlo, who's very closely linked to the Club of Budapest, which is directly linked to the Club of Rome. And we'll perhaps mention a couple of issues regarding the Club of Rome as we go through the presentation. But on here, in 12 modern languages and 12 ancient languages, are effectively the 10 goals and objectives of those who consider themselves to be the rightful rulers of a planetary fiefdom. And let me assure you, they have a completely different belief system than probably any of us in the room. It's a case of everything that you think you know to be sound and solid. These guys, in many cases, believe the total opposite. They believe that they have created our belief system, and it's through that belief system that they can control us. Let's have a look at a couple of those observations. Maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. There's been, because of this observation, there's been a lot of debate that they are effectively Gaia worshippers. And it's interesting that James Lovelock, who is credited with originating the term Gaia in reference to our Earth as a sentient being, also alludes to the suggestion that the world is overpopulated. Yet from my perspective, if Gaia is a sentient being, then she is more than capable of taking the decision as to the appropriate amount of sentient beings on her surface that she can take care of, or not. Guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. This is ostensibly eugenics. And as was alluded to during the course of the weekend, we don't have to go back very far in history to find a period in time like 1945, when the American soldiers were effectively going into the hospitals at the end of hostilities. They were shocked to find hospital staff still conducting euthanasia in the fundamental belief that it was the right thing to do. Now, a lot of these young healthcare, use the term loosely, professionals, were products of the Third Reich, because by that time, of course, Hitler had been in power for 12 years. Be not a cancer on the earth. Leave room for nature. Leave room for nature. Now let's look at some of what's going on here. Because not everybody agrees with their agenda. This is actually some of the more articulate graffiti. I think these ones are actually spelt right. But at least the message is getting across that we have taken account of this. But this is why, in the course of my presentations, I use a lot of newspaper cuttings. And I've learned, of course, today that it's actually Anthony J. Hilder and myself that keep the newspaper industry alive. By buying up all the papers and actually looking at what kind of bullshit is actually being fed to us. But the reality is, it's not all bullshit. Because part of these guys' belief system is that they actually have to tell us what they are doing and what their plans are. Because under their belief system, if they tell us what is occurring and what is going to occur, and we don't react, they take it as a mandate to plow ahead with that agenda. The onus is absolutely on us. So this is why we have to practice our discernment and discretion and actually develop our bullshit awareness so that we can determine within the media what we should be believing, what we should be recognizing as the truth, because it is in there, and what we should be recognizing as the propaganda. And of course, very recently, we have seen the massive, manipulated first stage of the financial collapse. Now, we're in a very similar situation, if not perhaps even a mirror, of what occurred in 1929 to 1933. Now, anybody who suggests that the financial crash was not pre-planned is actually living in a world of delusion and naivety. Because there are many, many commentators, including myself, and I produced a DVD in the middle of 2007, 1 month before Northern Rock collapsed, spelling out exactly what was about to occur. We didn't necessarily know the exact time scale, but we knew it was on the brink, because what was being applied within the financial sector was just not sustainable. Here, in this, is effectively the manifesto for the financial sector. It's a 6-page article, and you've got to love this. The man who runs the most powerful bank in the world and the most secretive, this is the guy who heads up Goldman Sachs. And he had the audacity to say he is doing God's work. How many times have we heard people now saying they're doing God's work in the last few years? Huh? Tony Blair was, of course, following God's lead. George Bush was reported to have told a Palestinian diplomat that God had told him to invade Iraq. Al Gore has recently said that he's basically doing on a spiritual quest, and now this guy tells us he's doing God's work. Well, these guys have some very interesting management practices as well, because here they are, in the article, they are boasting that the culture here is such that they drive people 24/7. They expect them to answer their phones all hours of the day and night, and this is how they create the fear culture. We say goodbye to the bottom 3 to 5% of staff every year. Now, this was actually creeping into the American corporate environment nearly 15 years ago, because I was fighting the introduction of exactly this philosophy in the oil industry 15 years ago. So this is nothing new. But this is a classic example. The term used to be personnel. Now it's human resources. Human resources. You are nothing more than a number. I mean, anybody who thinks that they owe their employer, particularly if they're in the corporate environment, they owe the employer any loyalty, really is delusional. It has become literally dog eat dog. Once upon a time, employers took pride in the fact that, if they were entrepreneurial, they created an environment where people could pay their mortgages, feed their families, and they took a responsibility towards their staff. That is not the case today. They are human resources. The green agenda, of course, is being promoted in a big way. And this is a quote from a report that was produced by an extreme right-wing think tank in the 1960s. In 1963, the report was written. It came into the public domain in 1967. And one of the quotes from that report says, "An effective political substitute for war would require alternate enemies, some of which might seem equally far-fetched in the context of the current war system. It may be, for instance, that gross pollution of the environment can eventually replace the possibility of mass destruction by nuclear weapons as the principal apparent threat to the species." 63. Now, this report from Iron Mountain, is often dismissed as a forgery. But a couple of years later, in 1969, Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote a book, Between Two Ages, The Technotronic Era. And he published it in 1970. And Zbigniew Brzezinski was either on the committee that produced this report, and as it went public, decided that he could incorporate some of the policy, philosophy in that document into his book, or he just decided that there were some bloody good ideas in here, and he'd plagiarize them and put them in his book. It's very, very difficult to get hold of this book now. They exchange hands for $500 a piece. But we're going to look just at a few quotes which should give you a clue about the veracity of this climate change agenda. This is from 1992, from the Club of Rome. The common enemy of humanity is man. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behavior that they can be overcome. The real enemy, then, is humanity itself. 1992. Professor Stephen Schneider, Stanford Professor of Climatology, contributor to many IPCC reports, the International Panel for Climate Change. We need to get some broad-based support to capture the public's imagination. So we have to offer up scary scenarios, make simplified dramatic statements, and make little mention of any doubts. Each of us has to decide what the right balance is between being effective and being honest. As we know, honesty in the academic community normally costs you your job, as Professor Nutt discovered recently. From Christine Stewart, the former Canadian Minister of the Environment, no matter if the science of global warming is all phony, climate change provides the greatest opportunity to bring about justice and equality in the world. There's some pretty strange thinking going on here, I can tell you. And Saint Al himself, I believe it is appropriate to have an over-representation of the facts on how dangerous it is as a predicate for opening the audience. Now, Al Gore's film, An Inconvenient Truth, as was discussed by David Bellamy at AV3, is a complete load of Hollywood hogwash. The judge in the Kent case, the High Court judge, stopped the trial after 9 significant inaccuracies, lies, had been determined in the film. And the classic is actually one of the opening sequences where there's a shot of a glacier crashing into the sea, and Al Gore saying, you know, this majestic scenery is at risk. It's actually plagiarized without permission from the opening sequences of a film called The Day the Earth Stood Still. And when it was shown to the producers of The Day the Earth Stood Still, they confirmed that it had been used without permission, and it wasn't genuine, it was computer generated. Paul Watson, the co-founder of Greenpeace. It doesn't matter what is true, it only matters what people believe. A similar quote was made by a guy whose name will come to me in a second, an author. He wrote a book. As many of you will know, I seriously question, the hypothesis of peak oil. I don't have time to go into that tonight, but this author, Jeremy Corsi, thank you, Jeremy Corsi, said, you know, the only reason we don't have peak oil, the only reason that this hypothesis is out there is because we have presented with something which we now believe to be true, but it has no foundation in fact. The oil industry stays very quiet on the subject because artificial scarcity tends to push up prices. The only way to get our society to truly change is to frighten people with the possibility of a catastrophe. Another contributor to the IPCC. And Al Gore again, the climate crisis is not a political issue. And this, by the way, was a statement that Al Gore made when he was totally outpointed in a debate regarding the scientific evidence to support his statements on climate change. And he responded a day later by saying, the climate crisis is not a political issue, it is a moral and spiritual challenge to all of humanity. It is our greatest opportunity to lift global consciousness to a higher level. Now, somebody had done some pretty fancy thinking overnight for this guy. So we've now changed climate change from being an agenda which is irrefutable because of the scientific evidence, to something that is now a spiritual quest. And you know what? Just recently in the UK, it was determined that green political views are now equated in the employment arena with religious views. You cannot be fired if you effectively refuse to carry out part of your job on the basis of your green philosophy. Now, let's have a look at probably the most significant observation amongst all this. We are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis. David Rockefeller, Club of Rome. Now, on the basis of that, who here would actually say that the climate change issue is worthy of some very serious debate? Yeah. It is not something that we should be expected to take at face value. And I think that some of the media articles recently, I think, have been taking the piss. The climate chief, give up meat to save the planet. Apparently it's the cows who generate 500 litres of methane. Well, you know, based on, I need to put these people in touch with May Wan Ho, because May Wan Ho came up with a pretty good use for methane, didn't she, during the course of her presentation? Yeah, well, with all the cows. So, you know, but, you know, let's cull the cattle population, because that way we can obviously impact on climate change. Now, forgive me, but the other thing that occurred to me was every time I breathe out, I'm actually contributing to the CO2 levels. So I'm just wondering how long it is before that's taxed. So to save myself money, I'm actually going to try and breathe less. Well, get practice in anyway before it becomes taxable. And of course, your pets. This is from the Guardian a few days ago. Britain's problem with pets, they're bad for the planet. The authors of a provocative new book have bad news for animal lovers. Pets are bad for the planet. They consume vast amounts of precious resources, produce mountains of noxious waste, and can be a disaster for wildlife. Well, the authors have said, well, we didn't mean it. It was only a spoof. Yeah, it's okay. So climate change is the fear that's being created. We can see the agenda that was driven from the 1960s. Actually, that report goes on to say that this is 1960s. It will take a generation to a generation and a half before climate change has sufficient traction to be taken seriously by the masses. Where are we at? Spot on. You know, these guys are good. Boy, they're good. GM foods. I'm not going to spend too much time on GM foods. As many of you know, I've been giving a number of presentations over the last few years on Codex Alimentarius. You know, and is it too late to shut the door on GM foods? Quite possibly. You know, but as Leonid says, you know, our natural environment has remarkable recovery powers, and I believe it would recover. But there is undoubtedly an agenda to take total control of the food situation. And if you wanted an illustration of that, you've only got to check out Article 81 of the Iraqi constitution that was forced upon the Iraqi government by Paul Bremner immediately before he left Iraq, because Article 81 forbids the Iraqi farmers to save their seeds. Birthplace of civilization and agriculture. They have to buy their seeds from God, you're good. This is actually New Scientist. I've still got the copy here, actually. And I picked up New Scientist because it had the article in it, Swine Flu Myths, What You Really Need to Know. I thought, I've got to read this. But then on the bottom, you see, was this other thing. It said, The Hunt for the Ultimate Killer. And I just thought I'd help them out. So, Dick Cheney and David Rockefeller, I think. But they've got a couple of they got a couple of henchmen, of course. There you go, Mr. Swine Flu himself, the Nobel Prize winner, who has famously said, basically, let's not worry too much about the useless eaters. And the guy, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who wrote the book I referred to, Between Two Ages, who has been Obama's mentor for 27 years. He has groomed Obama. There's no surprise that Obama is where he is right now. So, swine flu, fact versus fantasy. This is the article in New Scientist. As the misinformation multiplying on the internet weren't bad enough, even official advice is sometimes failing to keep up with the latest findings on the 2009 H1N1 flu. It's just a couple of the myths, just in case you weren't aware of them. This is jumping a bit, Matt. Yeah. What few people know is that flu itself is far more likely to cause Guillain-Barré syndrome than any vaccine. We know so few people know that. I spent 4 hours researching and couldn't find anything that links Guillain-Barré syndrome to the flu. All the cases of Guillain-Barré syndrome are associated with the vaccine. And yet in New Scientist, this is spelled out as one of the myths. This is, again, how they control the scientific community, because the scientific community think that the New Scientist is like a definitive publication. And they don't expect them to go and do any further research, because if it's in New Scientist, it's like the sun. Must be true. So this was actually, I think, from the Daily Mail. And it was Ask the Doctor. And this was supposedly a letter written in. I've already had swine flu, so why do I need the jab? Well, it's written by Mrs. Daniels of Kent, who's 80 years old. Well, his response, read the first line. I urge you to have the H1N1 swine flu vaccine, as even if you did have the illness, it can do no harm and will only boost your immunity further. I mean, this is just completely outrageous. It can do no harm. We know, obviously, because most of us now have done our own research. And thanks to Ben, if he's out there somewhere, I know, but Ben runs a website called the Hospital Porters Against the New World Order. It's brilliant. And it's thanks to Ben that a lot of healthcare professionals in this country have done their research and made their decision accordingly. And I don't have a problem with the pharmaceutical companies pushing the swine flu vaccine. What I do have a problem with is people being discouraged from making informed decisions. Now, in New York, as you may know, legislation was introduced which made healthcare workers, it forced healthcare workers to subject themselves to the swine flu vaccination in the event of a national emergency being declared. Well, Obama declared a national emergency on October the 23rd. And New York immediately demanded all their healthcare workers to turn up to the vaccine stations and get themselves vaccinated. So many refused, and they were told, well, if you don't take the vaccination, then you'll be out of a job. And fortunately, so many of them had the courage to stand up and say, okay, fire me then. That the New York State Senate had to turn around and say, well, okay, we won't actually enforce it just yet. Now, that legislation is also in place in Oklahoma and in Texas. It's not here in Europe yet. And, now, you see, we are being told some of the truth. Pandemic? What pandemic? There is no pandemic. The number of cases of swine flu, and certainly the deaths of swine flu, are far below anything that occurs with normal flu. Now, I'm not for one moment making light of it, so don't get me wrong. But, unfortunately, flu is part of the natural culling process every year. And every year, some 300,000 people in Europe die of the flu. We're all going to die one way or another. This is an annual cycle that comes around. Swine flu is getting nowhere near those numbers. Yet, why the continued campaign? Continued, despite the evidence that there's absolutely no pandemic at all. But why is the campaign continuing to get everybody vaccinated? And this was a classic. As it happens, I'm sure this is pure coincidence, I don't think there's any relationship 1 second, but I had run a series of advertisements in the southwest of England promoting my new DVD release, which is called The Truth Injection. It might just save your life. Well, the next day, this article appeared in the Times. And this is from the Chief Medical Officer for England, Sir Liam Donaldson, and he basically said that anybody who challenges or questions the government's campaign for mass vaccination is an extremist. And you've got to love the terminology. An extremist. You know, how much longer before we go to terrorist? Yeah, about 10 minutes probably. About right. This is from another wonderful magazine, Scientific American. I bought this because of the front, pills to make you smart. Yeah, so I had a couple before I came on stage. But inside was this boosting vaccine power. Well, talking about the adjuvants. Now, interestingly enough, in the US, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, has banned the use of adjuvants in the swine flu vaccinations. Now, adjuvants are like a Viagra for the vaccine. Supposedly boosts its power. But it's linked to some pretty interesting side effects. But they're not going to tell you about that. So the pills to make you smart, I wanted to include that because, you know, I've spent a number of hours during the course of my presentations talking about Ritalin, the effects of Ritalin, and the program to get kids taking Ritalin as part of a control process. It screws them up big time. Well, there's a professor at Manchester University who, interestingly, has the name of John Harris. And this professor, Professor John Harris, has stated twice now in the media, in the British media, that Ritalin should be made available over the counter because it boosts brain power. The fact that Ritalin is linked to teen suicide, it's pretty much linked to every major school shooting in the US, is obviously not taken into account by Professor John Harris, who, funnily enough, I discovered gets a significant amount of funding from a certain pharmaceutical company. No. Oh, I know. Incredible, isn't it, really? Well, what can you say? Shock. He probably doesn't know the link. The cost drugs for dementia kill hundreds. Well, there's a surprise. But, you know, part of the plan. Because this, you remember this? It's actually from a year ago. Baroness Warnock, dementia sufferers may have a duty to die. The veteran government advisor said pensioners in mental decline are wasting people's lives because of the care they require and should be allowed to opt for euthanasia even if they are not in pain. No, yeah, exactly. You know what this is? This is floating, you know, the idea. This is the way these guys work. They float the idea, test the public reaction, and you know, from that we can gauge how long it is before we can get this into mainstream thought, into consensus reality. Back to the point that where Germany was at in the 1940s, where anybody who was considered to be a burden on society and didn't fit in with their idea of the superhuman was granted a speedy journey into the next world. And this is Baroness Warnock floating that. That was in the Daily Telegraph, and there was really hardly any reaction. I mean, this is what's outrageous. There was no real public reaction to it at all. So, you know, what we have is this attack, this bio-spiritual warfare that is attacking us from all angles. And what it's trying to do is make sure it catches everybody. Because right now, in the financial attacks that's occurring, almost the best position to be in is to have nothing. Because if you've got nothing, then they can't take it away. I mean, if you're in your own house and you own your house, that's okay too. But if you're mortgaged to the hilt, which of course is what they were doing, they're encouraging people to get mortgaged to the absolute hilt so that they could pull the rug and get people under total control. Now, I have a guy I know, and this is a story from a year ago, and he wanted to have a chat with me. And he bought a house in 1996 for £40,000. That house 2 years ago, or 3 years ago now, was valued at £360,000. Now, he had been in that house for 13 years. He bought it at £40,000. It was valued at £360,000. So in theory, he should have been in great shape. The only problem is that, like thousands of others, he had remortgaged that house a number of times, and the mortgage on that house was over £300,000. And this is what caused the problem, of course, because fiat money was being created on the back of an artificial asset. And that's why it's not sustainable. And that's why the housing market has to crash by another probably 30, maybe even 40%, quite possibly in the next 3 or 4 years. Look at what gold is doing. At AV2, the price of gold was, I think, just about $875 an ounce. It is now $1,130. It was exactly. It was 234 in 2002 when Brown was instructed by David Rockefeller to sell Britain's gold. The Indians are buying up gold. The Chinese are actually setting up gold exchanges in all their cities. They're encouraging their citizens to buy gold. The Americans are getting worried because America in 1933 confiscated all the gold of their citizens. It's never happened in the UK. But gold is the hedge against inflation. You know, you're not going to get rich, ostensibly, by investing in gold. You know, the old adage is that, you know, back in the 1940s, one gold coin would buy you a reasonable quality suit. Today, one gold coin, which is worth about £160 today, a sovereign, gold sovereign, will buy you a reasonable quality suit. It holds its value, regardless of what's going on with the fiat currency. So the New World Order, you know, these guys genuinely believe that they are the rightful rulers of a planetary fiefdom. I'm not going to discuss the detail of that tonight. I've discussed that particularly in my DVD presentation, The Hidden Agenda. But they have a belief system that's totally alien to us. But we shouldn't be too surprised. The quest for the New Jerusalem, and the New Jerusalem in their terminology being Zion. Now, I'm going to tread on some interesting territory here, because I am going to discuss the Zionist agenda. But you know what? The Zionists have created a wonderful, a brilliant defensive mechanism. Brilliant. Because what they have linked themselves with is the Jewish people and Judaism. And they openly admit that when anybody challenges their agenda and their behavior, they will use the anti-Semitism card. Now, you know, through my research, the people with the most blatant anti-Semitic agenda, the people with the most blatant anti-Semitic behavior, the people with the genocidal behavior are the Zionists. The Zionists are using the Jewish people. Now, as a Gentile, I think, I am easy meat. I am easy prey. But there are some very, very brave people who are starting to realize what's occurring. And they are absolutely fed up with being used as the scapegoats and the brickbats of the Zionists and the global Zionist agenda. And one of those guys has written a very interesting book. Now, I encourage you to read this book. If a Gentile had written this book, he'd probably be dead by now. The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Pappé. Now, he's actually based at Exeter University, and he's a professor of Middle East history there. And in this book, he traces the history of the Zionists and the origins of the state of Israel. And he identifies the individual. He names names. He names the architects of the script, those who carried out the script, those who are in the front line. He goes into the detail of how Israel is today the most apartheid state in the world. How the Zionists have created this mythology around Israel and the Jewish people to serve their own ends. And a lot of the people in the US administration are Zionists. A lot of people in the British administration are Zionists. Now, tomorrow night, there's going to be a very interesting program, a very brave program on Channel 4 in the Dispatches series. And it's an investigation by Peter Oborne into the influence of the Friends of Israel in the UK. Now, the Friends of Israel is a Zionist organization. It is not representative of the Jewish people. Nearly 2 years ago, I think it was March of 2008, there was a raging debate on the Guardian website between people within the British Jewish community who were just fed up with being used by the Zionists and being told that if they questioned the Zionist agenda, they were self-hating Jews. There are some very brave people in Israel who don't get the recognition because, of course, what they're doing in terms of trying to get justice for the Palestinian people is not reported. And they are treated abysmally, of course, by the Zionist leadership of Israel. So, let's start to step beyond the fear of addressing this issue, because this issue is fundamental to a lot of what's occurring in the world today. And we have to recognize that there is a challenge. We have to choose our terminology very carefully. We have to know our facts. But it's an issue that we have to confront, because Zionism isn't going away. If anybody believes that the Zionist agenda has any desire to reach peace with the Palestinians, they are once again delusional. The Zionist agenda is to ethnically cleanse the whole area between the Nile and the Euphrates. And they will start, obviously, with Gaza and the West Bank and Israel. Now, they don't care whether it takes them 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years. But this is the microcosm of their ultimate agenda on a global basis. So the Enlilian Mafia doesn't like my pictures here, unfortunately. But the Enlilian Mafia consists of organizations that we know very, very well. This is Neterai Carter, which is an organization of Orthodox Jews, and they campaign tirelessly to get the recognition that Zionism does not represent Judaism. Questions later. And their henchmen, the Club of Rome, the Federal Reserve, the Bank of England, MI5, the CIA, and Mossad. All these organizations are either controlled directly by self-professed Zionists or very heavily influenced by them. In the US, this is the control mechanism. It's a little more complex than the UK because they put thought into it right from the outset. They knew what they wanted. And I'll just share with you some of the commonality here between the structure of control in the US and the UK. Skull and Bones has the ascendancy. It's had the ascendancy for a few years. Of course, both George Bush and John Kerry were bonesmen, as was George Bush Sr. The Skull and Bones, which is unique to Yale University, has about 500 graduates alive at any time, because there's only 15 initiates into Skull and Bones every year. And they make sure that all of their initiates are in key positions on organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, in the administration, and of course in the senior positions in the industrial military complex. That's how they keep the control. But it's unique to Yale. And there's a lot of good people who go to universities other than Yale, so they needed to find a way to control the other people. So there's an organization called Phi Beta Kappa. Now, Phi Beta Kappa is actually much older than Skull and Bones. Phi Beta Kappa, which is a fraternity that covers all of the Ivy League universities in the US, but Phi Beta Kappa was established on December the 5th, 1776. And Phi Beta Kappa, if you Google Phi Beta Kappa, I can pretty much guarantee you that you would find almost any senior member of the administration. If they're not in the Bones, they'll be in Phi Beta Kappa. It applies to the Clintons. It applies to Obama. These guys are all Phi Beta Kappa. So Phi Beta Kappa is the immediate support network. They know their role. They know their place. They have a very, very strict, almost military hierarchy. Then in the US, you have something that we don't have in the UK, which is the Shriners, which are all 32nd degree Freemasons. And I mean, it's all they're recognized as a charity organization. They raise millions. But there's a hell of a difference between the amount they raise and the amount that actually goes into their charitable hospitals, normally for children. And then below that is Freemasonry. So this is like the black structure behind what is in the media. Now, we don't have Phi Beta Kappa in the UK, so we've had to sort of create something that is going to fulfill a similar role. Any idea what that might be? Common purpose. Common purpose. Common purpose has been established by Julia Middleton to effectively create or fulfill the role of Phi Beta Kappa in the US. That's why they're recruiting from schools, but almost every local authority, almost every local health authority, every local police authority have all spent money training people on common purpose training courses. And that's why Brian Gerrish is doing such an outstanding job in exposing it, because he needs, and he's succeeding in getting people to ask the right questions. Very recently, in fact, it was Kenton, who's been working out in the market area. He came across a report where Surrey County Council had actually been questioned by their accountants as to why they had spent £48,000 on common purpose training. £48,000. Ask your councils the right questions. And the Freemasons, of course, I mean, in this country it's estimated there's around about 700,000 Freemasons. In the US, there's over 10 million. And I learned the hard way in the US. Fortunately, when I was working in the US, I had somebody who took pity on me and educated me and showed me how it works and showed me how I needed to play the system. On a global basis, this is just part of the web. Part of the web of organizations that are linked in ultimately to the Committee of 300. This is how control is maintained. Now, there's some good people on these organizations. There's no doubt about that at all. And the challenge is coming. Because the challenge is going to be when people actually have to step up to the plate and apply their ethics or disregard their ethics. Same in the UK. We've got some very good people in the police, in the civil service, in the medical community, the education, but they're going to have to stand up to the plate and challenge the agenda that is being pursued by the common purpose graduates. And of course, tragically, as Anthony Hilder very eloquently pointed out, we are at the end. And what we're seeing here in the last few days is all of the articles in the media that should have appeared in the run-up to the EU election. And that's exactly why the MP's expenses scam was created. It was a brilliant play. I mean, I take nothing away from these guys. They're very, very good at what they do. Very good at what they do. And that expenses scam had been in the making for 12 years. When Tony Blair changed the rules, and basically the MPs were encouraged to put their snouts deeper and deeper and deeper into the trough. Because these guys knew that when the time came, they could just pull the plug. In the scheme of things, it's nothing, it's loose change. I'm not condoning it, But, we're talking maybe the possibility that no more than about £1 million is going to be repaid. My God, that's what the bankers spend one night in a lap dance club. I mean, let's put it in perspective. But all the articles are appearing. Everything now, they're now starting to spell out exactly what the implications of the Treaty of Lisbon are. But why was there effectively a D-notice on this in the run-up to the EU elections? Because they didn't want to have a situation where UKIP would have potentially held balance amongst the British representatives within the European Parliament. Although, of course, there's no democracy there anyway, because the MEPs actually have zero impact. In fact, they don't even have that much. I mean, it's just a total scam. It's a gravy train. Yeah. This is the Sun. And in fact, at AV3, I actually quoted a Trevor Kavanagh article where he was basically giving the 13 million readers of the Sun the finger and basically saying, we're rolling headlong into EU totalitarianism and there's nothing you can do about it. Actually, he wrote there's nothing we can do about it, but what he meant was nothing you can do about it. But now it is spelled out in words of one syllable here. And here is Gordon here. Andy was talking about the smugness of the media. Well, this is the smugness of Brown. But, the media milking it. And again, this is all the stuff. And let me show you, I mean, if you can't see it. But, this here, on the screen here, all of this is exactly what should have been in every single daily paper in the run-up to the EU elections. Because only then would people have actually gone to the polls on the basis of being able to make an informed decision. But just like in Ireland, and I was over in Ireland for a few days before the EU elections. I was invited over there to give a couple of talks by a couple of local guys. And I had to see it for myself. I mean, if I hadn't seen it for myself, I wouldn't have believed how outrageous the propaganda was to get people to vote yes. On every lamppost around Dublin was the big sign saying, yes to jobs. So these people, I mean, of course, the moment that they voted no against the EU treaty, all of the EU funding for all the infrastructure projects was withdrawn. So a lot of unemployment, but it was all being attributed to the fact they voted no previously. The fact that there was a recession going on anyway, it was neither here nor there. So all the people were totally browbeaten into voting yes. And of course, I mean, there's tremendous amount of evidence that the vote was fixed anyway. I mean, it shocked me to discover that when the polling stations closed at 9 o'clock, now normally, in a democracy, the ballot boxes go straight to the returning office. And they're the responsibility of the returning officer once they get to the returning office, and the count starts pretty much immediately. In Ireland, there was a 12-hour gap. So the polling stations closed, and the counts didn't start, the returning offices didn't open until 9 o'clock the following morning. And in theory, the ballot boxes were in the possession of the Garda for that 12 hours. And there are so many cases being reported of tampering, clear tampering. People going into the backs of police cars with bags where the ballot boxes were being carried, and obviously stuffing votes. As Kissinger said in Chile, when Kissinger effectively initiated the coup in Chile, which of course occurred on September the 11th, 1973, because the Chileans had voted in Salvador Allende, and Kissinger just said, no, this is way too important for the people to decide. Same with the Irish. Well, hey, all is not lost, because, some people are starting to wake up and realise what's occurring. And this is Becky from London. And Becky says, it's a disgrace. No, you laugh. I mean, this is a clear indication to me that the youth of the country is starting to wake up, because, the following day it was Chloe from Sheffield, and Chloe And Chloe from Sheffield was upset that her local Sainsbury's was closing down. Only in the sun.
Which tech wrote that?
But one nightmare may be over. Because the man who was on a mission from God, who was absolutely promised the presidency of the EU, that's why he converted to Catholicism. He had to be a Catholic to take on the role of president of the EU. He was promised it. There's absolutely no question he was promised it, and I can't think of any more justice in the short term anyway than him not getting in that position. But their agenda is rolling forward. There is no doubt about that whatsoever. And there's 3 things that they rely on. 3 things. Number 1 is apathy. Apathy amongst the people. And obviously they try and create that with all the distraction. The next one does concern me more. And this is abdication. And the other one is also a bit of a problem for me. And that's willful ignorance. These are the 3 primary tools of the New World Order. This 6,000 or so people on a global basis. And that's the estimate of a guy called David Rothkopf, who wrote a book called The Superclass. He says that his estimation of working amongst these people, there are no more than 6,000 people. It's probably a lot fewer than that. I mean, the guys like Blair and even Rumsfeld and Cheney, they're not amongst the 6,000. Those guys are just the Sonderkommando. Those guys are just the guys who are bought to carry out the agenda. They're given the shekels and the bells and the whistles to go with their alleged responsibility to carry out the agenda. They'll get their comeuppance at some point. But we have, I think, a tremendous opportunity here. I mean, let's consider the possibility, absurd though it may seem at first pass, that these guys are doing us the biggest favor ever. Because they are actually giving us an opportunity to see what's going on. Now, there have always been people throughout history who have been able to see what's going on. And some of them have made tremendous effort, even leaving their own discourses of their research at that time. But they didn't have the luxuries that we have today, like the internet and telephones. This global instant communication. It would have been far more difficult to organize, say, an event such as this. So there have been a few people through history, but now it's rapidly increasing at a phenomenal rate. Obviously, for many, not fast enough. But it is increasing. And that's our challenge. We have an opportunity to wake up. And these guys are actually the catalyst. So, taking that to the absolute extreme, consider the possibility that these guys are doing us such a phenomenal favor. They have actually sacrificed themselves in some way to carry out these roles to give us this opportunity. Maybe these guys are extremely advanced souls. Maybe. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying consider the possibility. Let's look at the positives of what's occurring. And then we have a choice. Do we abdicate? Because we're beyond apathy, I think. There's nobody here that's apathetic. And I don't think there's probably anybody here that's abdicating or willfully ignorant. But those are possibly a lot of the people that we do come into contact with. And that's our challenge, to raise that awareness. To give people that opportunity to see through the veil. Because, as you know yourselves, once you actually see through the veil, there's no turning back. It's not possible. And that's when you make the decision of abdicating or being willfully ignorant. Now, the beauty of these events, obviously, is bringing people together. And the beauty of bringing this range of speakers together is to, give everybody an opportunity to hear different perspectives. Because I don't believe there is any one panacea to challenging this agenda. It's going to take everybody's skills, expertise, interests. And different people have different interests. They have different buttons that need to be pushed. And it's whatever motivates you. I get a lot of emails from people saying, "Oh, I've just seen your DVD on on Codex Alimentarius," which is obviously what Cynthia had seen recently, apparently. And they say, "What can I do?" Well, unfortunately, I don't actually write back to a lot of them because that's how the pharmaceutical industry try and bog me down. They'll have their PR agencies have people send me one-liner emails, which if I responded to, will take me 2 or 3 hours to reply to. And of course, if I'm responding to those kind of emails, I'm not actually doing anything constructive. So I have a tendency to only respond to emails from people I know. But if people do make contact on the phone, then I will talk to them. And I say to people, look, you do whatever you feel you can do. And if you can't think of something right now, then don't do anything. But give it some thought. Think about what you want to do. Think about the areas of expertise that you have. And look at how then you can take that forward. And you will find other like-minded people. I mean, I have 20 or so of them helping me with this. And I'm sure that 20 and maybe some more will be back for AV4. So the determination of what to do is very much with you. It's the opportunity to step up to the plate, to rise to the challenge, and be all you can be. And that's a horrible phrase because it was coined by the US military. And it's classic doublespeak. But we can, we have this tremendous opportunity. And I know there's a lot of people out there already doing as much as they can. There's Malcolm who holds weekly screenings in Pusey with Matthew's assistants. There's people who have monthly meetings, weekly meetings in Liverpool, where Anthony J. Hilda is speaking tomorrow. There's groups that have become established, and they don't have any particular agenda other than to share the information, share the knowledge, and encourage people to educate themselves. So it really doesn't matter what it is you decide to do, just go do it. Because, as Marcus Aurelius said, some 2 centuries ago, what we do in life ripples through eternity. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.